The beach house had always been a place where time softened its grip, where the sound of the waves dissolved sharp edges, and made even the most painful memories feel distant, manageable, almost forgiven. That was precisely why Will chose it. He believed, perhaps too desperately, that if there were any place capable of sealing the past shut, it was here, suspended between ocean and sky, removed from the relentless scrutiny of the world they lived in every other day. When they gathered this week, Will, Electra, Steffi, Finn, and Dylan, the intention was not celebration in the truest sense, but ritual. A symbolic ending. A collective agreement that the tragedy, which had bound and broken them, would no longer dictate the shape of their future. They arrived carrying that intention like fragile glass, careful not to drop it, careful not to look too closely at the cracks already running through it. The afternoon light was generous, gilding the windows and smoothing the lines of exhaustion etched into their faces. For a while, it worked. They stood together with raised glasses, the clink of crystal sounding hopeful, almost ceremonial. The toast itself was deliberately vague, filled with words like moving forward, resilience, and peace, phrases chosen precisely, because they avoided the specifics that still burned beneath the surface. No names were spoken that carried too much weight. No memories were allowed to sharpen. It was a peace constructed with restraint, and they all knew it. Electra felt the strain of that restraint most acutely. She smiled, lifted her glass, and mirrored the calm around her, yet inside she sensed the tension tightening like a wire pulled too far. She had learned, long ago, that enforced calm often preceded collapse. The laughter felt rehearsed, the pauses between sentences too deliberate. Her gaze kept drifting to Dylan, who lingered near the edge of the room, close to the windows as if instinctively seeking a way out. He looked composed, but there was a rigidity in his posture that betrayed effort rather than ease. Something in his silence unsettled her more than any outburst could have. Steffi, standing beside Finn, shared that unease, though she expressed it differently. She had survived enough crises to recognize when peace was being negotiated rather than earned. Finn's hand at her back was grounding, a quiet reminder that whatever surfaced, they would face it together. Still, Steffi's eyes scanned the room, alert to every shift in energy. She understood the impulse behind this gathering, but she did not trust it. Tragedy, she had learned, did not disappear simply because people were tired of carrying it. Will tried to anchor the moment, steering conversation toward lighter ground, recounting stories that framed their shared history as something they had already overcome. His voice was steady, but beneath it lay urgency. He needed this to work. He needed proof that choosing peace could be enough, that intention alone could rewrite what had gone wrong. What he did not realize was that his determination to close the door on the past was exactly what left them unprepared for what was still waiting behind it. The calm fractured without warning. A subtle shift in the air, an unfamiliar smell that did not belong to salt, or wood or old memories. Smoke. At first, it was faint, easy to dismiss as something external, distant. Then the fire alarm screamed to life, its sound slicing through the room with violent clarity. The illusion shattered instantly. Panic surged, replacing forced serenity with raw instinct. They moved as one, abandoning glasses, conversation, and ceremony, racing toward the front door. Will reached it first, heart pounding, only to feel the unyielding resistance beneath his hand. Locked. He tried again, harder this time, rattling the handle, disbelief giving way to fear. The realization spread through the group with horrifying speed. The door would not open. Another exit was attempted, then another, each one sealed, each one confirming the same terrible truth. They were trapped. Smoke began to thicken, curling along the ceiling, seeping into every corner of the house. The air grew harsh, burning their throats, stinging their eyes. Electra's breath came in shallow gasps, as the reality of the situation crashed down on her. This was no longer about buried secrets or unresolved grief. This was survival. Steffi's composure snapped into command, her instincts sharpened by fear, shouting for them to stay low, to move together, to keep breathing as best they could. Finn was already scanning the room, searching for anything that could break a window, any way to create an opening before the smoke became unbearable. Dylan felt the weight of guilt slam into him with suffocating force. As the smoke closed in, memories he had tried to keep buried surged to the surface, unbidden and merciless. The irony was almost unbearable. They had gathered here to close the chapter on an old tragedy, and now they were facing the possibility of creating another one, together, trapped by circumstances they could no longer control. His chest tightened, not only from the smoke but from the realization that silence, his silence, all of their silence, had always been dangerous. The fire spread faster than any of them anticipated. Flames licked at the edges of the room, heat intensifying, the crackle of burning wood growing louder, more aggressive. Panic threatened to overwhelm them, each second stretching into something unbearable. Electra stumbled, coughing violently, and Finn caught her just in time, pulling her back, anchoring her to the moment. Steffi's voice cut through the chaos, urging them to stay conscious, to keep moving, even as her own vision blurred. Outside, sirens wailed, faint at first, then closer, growing louder with each passing second. The sound was both salvation and torment, a reminder that help was coming but not yet here. Inside the house, time distorted. The smoke was everywhere now, thick and choking, reducing the room to shadows and heat. Will's optimism, the belief that he could control outcomes through intention alone, dissolved completely. All that remained was fear of losing them, fear that this attempt at closure had led them straight into catastrophe. When the firefighters finally broke through, it felt unreal, like a moment borrowed from someone else's life. Windows shattered, doors were forced open, fresh air rushed in with brutal intensity. Strong arms pulled them from the smoke one by one, dragging them into the open, onto the sand where the cool night air hit their lungs like shock. They collapsed there, coughing, shaking, barely aware of anything beyond the burning in their chests and the ringing in their ears. Survival did not come without cost. All of them were injured, some more severely than others. Smoke inhalation, burns, wounds sustained in the frantic scramble to escape. The beach house, once a symbol of refuge, smoldered behind them, its silhouette warped and broken against the night sky. The scene was chaotic. Paramedics shouting instructions, flashing lights cutting through the darkness, but beneath it all lay a deeper, more devastating clarity. They had tried to seal the past away without reckoning with it, to manufacture peace instead of confronting truth. And in doing so, they had placed themselves in a situation where danger could thrive unnoticed until it exploded into something uncontrollable. As they were loaded into ambulances, pain coursing through their bodies, the weight of that realization settled heavily over them. This was not just an accident. It was a reckoning. Lying there, injured and shaken, each of them understood something had irrevocably changed. The secrets they had avoided, the grief they had tried to outrun, the silence they had mistaken for healing, all of it had led here. The fire had stripped away pretense, leaving only raw consequence in its wake. Whatever survived them after this would not be built on forced calm or unspoken agreement. If they made it through the aftermath, if they healed, it would have to be with honesty sharp enough to hurt and courage strong enough to endure it. The beach house burned behind them as a grim testament to that truth, its flames finally dying down as dawn crept closer. The tragedy they had tried to close was no longer confined to memory. It had followed them into the present, demanding to be seen, acknowledged, and answered. And as the sirens faded into the distance, one reality remained undeniable: peace forged without truth is not peace at all. It is simply the quiet before everything catches fire. The announcement landed like a carefully wrapped explosive placed at the center of a room already thick with history, expectation, and unspoken anxiety. Brooke chose the Christmas season deliberately, believing, perhaps hoping, that the warmth of tradition and the promise of renewal would soften the impact of her news. When she revealed the engagement, her voice steady and her smile luminous, the reaction around the table was immediate and divided. There were gasps of delight, congratulations offered with practiced enthusiasm, and a ripple of excitement that clung to the idea of beginnings. Yet beneath that surface response, something far more complicated stirred. Christmas, after all, was never just a holiday in this family. It was a magnifying glass. Every emotion grew sharper under its light, every fear more difficult to hide. Brooke framed the engagement as certainty, as a long-awaited alignment of love, forgiveness, and endurance. She spoke of timing, of lessons learned, of choosing hope not as an impulse, but as a commitment. What she did not say, what she could not say without unraveling the moment, was how fragile that certainty felt even as she held it up for others to admire. Years of repeating patterns had taught her that happiness, once named too boldly, often invited challenge. Still, she believed this time was different. She needed it to be different. The ring on her finger was not merely a promise of marriage. It was a declaration that she was done living in anticipation of collapse. Across the table, Deacon watched with a restraint that bordered on unease. He knew Brooke well enough to recognize when confidence was built on resolve rather than peace. He did not doubt her sincerity, but sincerity had never been the issue where Sheila was concerned. If anything, it was sincerity that Sheila understood how to weaponize best. Deacon's concern was not dramatic, nor did it manifest as accusation. It lived in his eyes, in the way his jaw tightened as he scanned the room, measuring reactions, noting where attention lingered too long. He had survived Sheila's games before, had learned the hard way that her most dangerous moves were rarely loud. She did not destroy lives with spectacle, she destabilized them with suggestion. Taylor shared that instinctive apprehension, though she carried it differently. Where Deacon's fear was born from proximity, Taylor's emerged from pattern recognition. She had watched relationships implode not because of betrayal, but because of doubt left unattended. The engagement announcement, joyous as it appeared, felt premature to her, not because she questioned Brooke's feelings, but because she understood how easily fear could masquerade as caution. Sheila did not need to push anyone toward wrongdoing. She merely needed to remind them of their capacity for it. The Christmas dinner unfolded with ritualistic precision. Candles flickered, reflecting off polished silverware, casting warm light across faces determined to appear relaxed. Laughter rose and fell in appropriate intervals. Stories were shared, memories softened to fit the season. Brooke basked in the glow of attention, accepting congratulations with gratitude, while quietly monitoring the room for signs of discord. She told herself she was imagining the tension, that it was only the weight of history making her hyper-aware. Yet her gaze kept drifting toward Sheila's absence, which felt louder than presence ever could have been. Sheila did not arrive late, nor did she announce herself dramatically. She did not need to. Her influence had already preceded her, woven invisibly into the atmosphere through memory alone. When she finally appeared, it was almost disappointingly ordinary. No confrontation. No provocation. She greeted everyone politely, offered smiles that revealed nothing, and took her seat as though she belonged there unquestioned. That was the brilliance of it. By behaving as if she posed no threat, she forced everyone else to confront their own suspicion, their own inability to relax in her proximity. Sheila understood the table better than any of them. She knew where alliances were fragile, where insecurities lay dormant beneath celebration. She did not address Brooke's engagement directly. That would have been too obvious, too easily dismissed. Instead, she listened. she observed. She waited for the moment when conversation drifted toward reflection, toward the past, toward the familiar Christmas tradition of acknowledging how far everyone had come. That was where doubt could breathe. When Sheila finally spoke, it was almost incidental, framed as concern rather than challenge. She mentioned trust in passing, the way it could feel solid until it was tested by unexpected change. She spoke of how fear often disguised itself as intuition, how people sometimes sensed danger not because it existed, but because they expected it to. Her words were not aimed at anyone in particular, and that was precisely the point. They landed differently on each person, settling into existing cracks and expanding them quietly. Brooke felt it first, a subtle tightening in her chest that had nothing to do with Sheila's tone and everything to do with timing. The engagement, still new and fragile, suddenly felt exposed. Sheila's words echoed against Brooke's own buried doubts, the questions she had refused to articulate even to herself. Was she choosing love, or choosing familiarity? Was certainty a product of clarity, or exhaustion? Brooke dismissed the thoughts immediately, irritated at herself for allowing Sheila's presence to infiltrate her joy. Yet dismissal did not erase resonance. Around the table, reactions varied. Some nodded thoughtfully, others shifted uncomfortably. Deacon's suspicion sharpened into clarity. He recognized the maneuver instantly. Sheila had not accused, suggested, or threatened. She had simply reminded them all that fear existed, that doubt was reasonable, that certainty was fragile. And in doing so, she had handed each couple a mirror, forcing them to confront their own unresolved anxieties. The conversations that followed fractured subtly, splintering into smaller exchanges heavy with implication. A casual remark about past mistakes became a referendum on forgiveness. A light-hearted joke about trust lingered too long, its humor undercut by unspoken meaning. Couples found themselves defending positions they had not realized were vulnerable. Words were chosen more carefully, then too carefully, until silence itself felt accusatory. Brooke noticed the shift and attempted to counteract it, redirecting attention toward plans, toward the future, toward tangible details like dates and venues. Yet the more she emphasized forward motion, the more others seemed pulled backward. Sheila watched quietly, satisfied not by overt reaction, but by the subtle erosion unfolding before her. She did not need to stay long. Her work was already done. As the evening wore on, fear began to do what it did best, personalize itself. One couple questioned whether their trust was naive. Another wondered if reassurance had replaced honesty. Old arguments resurfaced, not as fights, but as hesitation. The table that had begun the night unified by tradition now felt divided by introspection. Christmas music played softly in the background, its cheer increasingly discordant with the tension thickening the air. Brooke's engagement, once the centerpiece of the gathering, became a catalyst for comparison. Her certainty forced others to evaluate their own, and in doing so, exposed the absence of it. She sensed resentment flicker beneath polite smiles, felt the weight of responsibility settle uncomfortably on her shoulders. This was supposed to be her moment, yet it was unraveling into something far less celebratory. Deacon confronted Brooke quietly, not to criticize but to warn. He spoke of patterns, of Sheila's restraint, of how silence could be more destructive than confrontation. Brooke resisted at first, unwilling to believe that such minimal interference could cause such disruption. Yet as she surveyed the room, noting the tension etched into faces that had arrived hopeful, doubt crept in despite her resolve. She had underestimated the power of suggestion, the way fear could mobilize itself once acknowledged. Taylor, too, felt the consequences unfolding. She watched couples she cared about retreat into defensiveness, saw how quickly joy curdled into self-protection. The realization stung. They had all prepared for Sheila's chaos, but not for her restraint. They had armed themselves against attack, not against implication. In trying to appear unbothered, they had left themselves exposed. By the time dessert was served, the damage was irreversible. Conversations were stilted, laughter forced. The unspoken hovered heavy above the table, shaping every interaction. Sheila excused herself early, her departure unremarkable, almost courteous. Yet her absence only amplified her presence, leaving behind a vacuum filled with unresolved fear. In the aftermath, relationships began to fracture quietly. Not through betrayal, but through suspicion. Partners revisited conversations with new interpretation, questioned motivations previously taken for granted. The engagement that had begun as a declaration of hope now stood as a mirror reflecting collective insecurity. Brooke retreated inward, grappling with guilt she had not anticipated. Had her announcement invited scrutiny that others were not prepared to withstand? Or had it merely revealed what was already there? Sheila did not celebrate her success openly. She never needed to. Her satisfaction lay in knowing that she had reminded them all of something they preferred to forget. That fear, once acknowledged, rarely remains contained. She had not destroyed relationships. She had simply loosened their foundations and allowed gravity to take over. Christmas passed with its usual rituals, but the warmth was diminished, the cheer tinged with caution. Brooke's engagement remained intact, but altered, now shadowed by awareness rather than innocence. Deacon and Taylor remained vigilant, understanding now that protection required more than confrontation. It required honesty powerful enough to withstand doubt. In the end, the most devastating truth was not that Sheila had manipulated them, but that she had not needed to try very hard. One doubt, placed precisely, had been enough. And as the season closed and the lights dimmed, it became painfully clear that the greatest threat to their happiness was not Sheila's actions, but their own fear of confronting what lay beneath their celebrations.